1979, I came over here. The happened is in my country is in Saigon. They fought and all the Vietnamese. They didn't like the communism. They left there and go to the refugee camp in Hong Kong, Malaysia. I arrived here, it's only myself. After 2 years later, my wife and 2 children left my country to Indonesia, and after that, I get a visa from the government and bring them over here.
Since the beginning of recorded history, there have been refugees. Down through the centuries, millions and millions of people have been forced to leave their homes and their countries and seek refuge from war, persecution, and natural disasters. In 1988, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimated that there were over 14 million refugees worldwide in need of protection. Ireland's history for resettling refugees started in 1945, when over 1,000 children from Austria, Germany and France were accommodated here for periods ranging from 3 months to 3 years. A second influx of refugees arrived in 1949. This time they were Baltic refugees, and they were housed in a camp in Rockgrove, County Cork. In 1956, 530 Hungarian refugees were housed in an army camp at Knockalisheen, County Limerick. They remained in Ireland for up to 2 years. In 1973, over 100 Chilean refugees were resettled in this country. In 1979, Ireland agreed to resettle 100 refugees from Vietnam, boat people. This figure was eventually increased to 212. Government orders in 1981 and again in 1987 allowed 145 close relatives of the Vietnamese people already resettled in Ireland to join their families. The total number of Vietnamese living in Ireland in February 1991 was 417. The last group of refugees to be resettled in Ireland were a group of 26 Baha'i Iranian people who arrived in 1985.
Well, generally Ireland hasn't been a happy landing place for refugees. Although it has accepted refugees since the Second World War, most of these refugees have now left Ireland, except for the Vietnamese community who were settled here in 1979. For example, the Hungarian refugees were forced to go on strike, a hunger strike, to draw attention to their plight. The Chileans also had to make noises to draw attention to their language difficulties and their need for psychological support. The Vietnamese who came in 79, again the response in the beginning was on an ad hoc basis, and as their difficulties increased, a permanent structure was set up in 1985 to look after their needs and the needs of the Baha'i community.
Most refugees who seek asylum in Ireland have a limited knowledge of the English language. Being without an appropriate means of communication is not only a disadvantage, it is a hardship that adds to the traumas that the refugees have already endured. Learning to interact with their hosts is a matter of primary importance to all refugees.
The acquisition of the majority language of any country is crucial to a refugee group when they resettle in that country. Obviously in Ireland the majority language is English, and learning English has proved to be a major difficulty for all refugee groups that arrived here. It was a particular problem with the Chileans, and it also is a particular problem with the Vietnamese, who over 10 years since they resettled here, many of them still only have functional English. This is mainly due to the poor educational input that went into the resettlement programme. However, in one area of Dublin, it wasn't until 1988 that the refugees were offered any help at all. The programme was badly funded from the start. It was episodic in nature. It was funded on a yearly basis with the allocation of a number of teacher hours. It was obviously never thought through as a structured programme over a number of years. This programme still continues.
In 1986, the Irish government formed the Refugee Resettlement Committee. Since that time, the committee has worked with the Vietnamese and Baha'i refugees. In 1991, the Refugee Resettlement Committee was renamed the Refugee Agency.
A special English language course is provided for refugees when they arrive in Ireland. The hours for this course are provided by the Department of Education, and the course is run by Dublin City Vocational Education Committee. So when a group of refugees arrive in Ireland, after an initial settling in period, they would then start attending classes 4 days a week for about 4 hours a day, and this would go on for about 2 to 2.5 years. The aim of the course is to bring these students to a level of English where they will be capable of undertaking an industrial training course, for example with FOSS or CERT, with a view to being ready and trained for employment. The course is a pilot project, and it's 2.5 years in existence now. So the people who actually started at the beginning of the course are still there, and some of them have made very good progress. In fact, the most advanced group have asked us to allow them to have an extension of their course in order to reach what's commonly known as the European threshold level of English and to undertake an internationally recognised examination. As well as this intensive English language course, we also run classes at local level for the Vietnamese who have been here for a longer period, and these would be run by the local Vocational Education Committee.
A knowledge of the host language is only the first step in a successful refugee resettlement program. The refugees' place in the new society must be found. Questions and policies of integration, assimilation, or multiculturalism must be considered and addressed.
In general terms, I think it could be said that the Vietnamese had integrated very well into Irish society, particularly the young ones. Some families now have opened their own businesses and are self-supporting. Children are speaking with local accents. Their parents are worried that they're forgetting about their own culture, and are starting classes for Vietnamese and that sort of thing. On the other side of the scale, just like any group of people, you have the weak people in it, particularly the old, and some people feel that those old people will never really fully integrate into Irish society. They haven't learned the language, for example, and without that, that's the key to integration.
The Iranian Baha'i refugees who arrived in 1985 had a different resettlement experience than the Vietnamese people. The Baha'i refugees were resettled in small groups, located throughout the country.
And the purpose of being spread out in different cities was that they could learn the English language quickly, and they could learn the culture and traditions of the community better. These Baha'i refugees settled down in different cities, and now they are very successful. Among of them, they were young married couple with small children. They were middle-aged people with teenage children, the age 15 to 19. The children were sent to school and learned the English very quickly and made their friends. The youth found it very easy to adopt the culture and traditions and the language, and they finished their school, and now they are in the process of their education in colleges or universities.
I think if you look at it family by family, you will find that, for example, the unemployment rate amongst the Vietnamese, because so many of them are self-employed, would be less than the national unemployment average.
Ireland's reputation for hospitality and friendliness does not necessarily extend to all people. Irish society is predominantly a monocultural society. However, there are a number of nationalities resident here. In 1985, it was estimated that there were 21,000 non-EC people living in Ireland. Evidence of latent racism in Irish society was revealed in a 1977 survey. A relatively severe degree of racial prejudice exists in Dublin. Further evidence of racism in Ireland was found in 1985. 24% of those interviewed considered that people of a different race or colour should live in separate districts, and another 12% admitted that they were racially prejudiced. In 1990, a report to the European Parliament indicated that racism in Ireland could reach dangerous levels if there were more foreigners, in particular non-Europeans, in Ireland.
It's difficult to define what is racism and what is vandalism. As some of our Vietnamese live in problem areas, there has been discrimination against them. Some have had their windows broken, their doors, graffiti written on their doors. They have had their cars vandalised, their tyres slashed, and some have had their mobile takeaways graffiti written all over them.
Racism does exist in Ireland. It does, even though most people wouldn't really think that it does. But if they were in an interracial marriage, or if they had very, very close knowledge or friendship with people from overseas, they would then learn some of the stories that some of these people have experienced in Ireland.
So I think there is a certain amount of racism in Ireland.
It is estimated that there are between 5,000 and 10,000 people resident in Ireland that have an illegal or non-legal status. Their countries of origin are Nigeria, Ethiopia, Africa, China, Palestine, Poland, and other East European countries. Some arrive as students and stay on after completing their studies. Some arrive with limited work permits and remain after the work permits have expired, and others just arrive.
The government accepts into the country asylum seekers who qualify under the Geneva Convention for the category of refugees. That, however, primarily is a matter for the Department of Justice.
Yes, when somebody arrives at an Irish port or airport and indicates that they require asylum or seek protection of the Irish state, they are always given temporary asylum.
The Irish Red Cross now is involved with what we call spontaneous refugees. These are people who, without prior notice to the government here, or without the government giving us prior notice of arrival of a group of maybe 100 refugees, they arrive at airports or ports and they look for political asylum. And in the interim period, while their case is being looked at by the Department of Justice and Foreign Affairs and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the Red Cross has a caring role whereby we accommodate them in a refugee home in Dublin.
Basically, when they arrive in Ireland, they have to register, either when they arrive at immigration or subsequently if they have visas, which they can obtain at Irish consulates outside the country. They then have to register with the Department of Justice or the Aliens Office. When they have registered, then the position is that they may wish to make an application for refugee status. And the position is that then the government obligations under the Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees of 1951 come into play. The position is that although we have ratified the convention, it hasn't become part of our domestic law.
Ireland has no legislation dealing specifically with refugees or a procedure to deal with an application from a refugee. However, Ireland is a signatory to the Convention relating to the status of refugees signed at Geneva in 1951 and its 1967 protocol. These treaties, which bind Ireland to apply their provisions under international law, are said by the Department of Justice to be the standards which they apply.
The criteria used by the Minister for Justice in deciding on any request for refugee status are those laid down in the Geneva Convention, which sets out that somebody must demonstrate a well-founded fear of persecution on grounds of race, religion, or political beliefs.
However, Irish citizenship can only be conferred on an alien by means of a certificate of naturalization. This certificate is granted subject to the absolute discretion of the Minister of Justice.
In 1979, my parents decided to leave Vietnam. My parents bought a little boat, and on deciding that they were going to leave Vietnam, they didn't want to raise any suspicions. So we all had to meet each other at a certain place and a certain time. My sister was told to meet my parents at this particular place, but after waiting for 24 hours for them, she fell asleep. She was only 14 at the time, and she didn't know the importance of having to leave Vietnam, the risk of having to leave and everything like that. So she fell asleep anyway, and when my mother came to get her, she wasn't there. But there was no time to look for her, so my parents decided to go without her. So we left without her, and 10 years later we found her in the end. In the last years that we have found her, we applied for a visa for her and her family, but so many times we were turned down. And recently I just got a letter from the Department of Justice to say that they have refused us, that she won't be getting a visa to come to Ireland. So we're still hoping that one day they will let her come in to be with us.
There may be rules, but we're not au fait with them. As a lawyer, I am not able to say to a client whether they're going to be accepted as a refugee or not, because whatever rules there are, they're internal departmental rules, and they're made by the Department of Justice, but they are not published.
Well, I think ministers must have discretion in many things, but that discretion should be exercised within the framework of a set of rules, of a policy. Then the applicant knows what he must meet. He knows whether it's wise or not to make application. If there are rules and policies, then organisations like the Irish Council for Refugees can press for a change of those rules or policies. We're dealing here with people's whole lives and happiness, and a negative response from Ireland can be interpreted very badly throughout the rest of the community.
Worldwide, the numbers of people who become refugees has been increasing at a frightening rate. In 1970, there were 4.5 million refugees. By 1980, that number had risen to 10.2 million. Today, there are 17 million people who are refugees. Most are women and children, and most are living in dehumanizing conditions. Families are split apart. Children are orphaned. Adults uprooted from their homes, and the anxious and frightening search for a place to settle begins for the unfortunate millions. The enormous and increasing number of refugees worldwide is a painful reality of today's world.
Given the scale of the problem, it would be difficult to say that anybody is doing enough, but certainly Ireland's record on this at official level has been very unsatisfactory. We have no quota, no annual quota for the reception of refugees, although our Irish politicians are, I suppose, unanimous in suggesting that the Americans should have a very large annual quota for reception of Irish people who want to find a better way of life. Now, refugees aren't just looking for a better way of life, they're looking for some way to live. And Ireland, as the 27th richest country in the world, should be prepared to take in and help some of them.